This is Meredith Oliver, and here's another outstanding interview with my co-host, Chuck Gallagher.
Chris Clake-Epstein speaks about change and is featured in a wonderful article in Speaker Magazine in the September issue. So as we begin my interview with Chris, I highly encourage you to read Chris's article and check out the link to a more comprehensive article that she has generously made available to you. Chris is facing changes herself, and in this profoundly touching interview, Chris is open, honest, transparent, and inspiring. So with no further intro needed, here's my interview with Chris Clake-Epstein.
Chris Clake-Epstein is my guest on VOE. It is an honor to have you here.
It is an honor to be here.
So you would not remember this, or at least would not remember me, and that's absolutely okay.
Okay, you want to know, can we tell a secret?
Okay, sure.
Because people say that to you all the time, and it's kind of hard to know what to say to respond to that. Here, let's play it.
Okay.
Just come up to me and tell me that you were in my audience.
Chris, I was in your audience as NSA North Texas.
Were you sitting on the left-hand side?
I don't remember.
Well, I kind of think you were sitting on the left-hand side. Here's the trick. I got a 50-50 chance of being right, and chances are you won't remember either, but it's a great way to respond to that kind of approach.
You know, I should have known from you that there would be something like that.
Secrets. We're telling secrets here.
Secrets are okay.
I think so too,
Secrets
as long as
okay.
nobody tells anybody else.
Yeah, right. Okay, so Chris, let me ask you a question. So let's assume for a moment that someone's at an NSA conference, whatever conference it may be, Winter Conference, CSP Summit, whatever it happens to be, and they come up to you and they say, oh my goodness, what can you tell me that's really going to help me advance my career? What advice would you give them in the hallway?
I'm known for asking good questions. So my response to that would be, tell me where you are on your journey. Because if you're just starting out, my advice would be different than if you've been doing it for a number of years, and my advice would be different if you have been doing it for lots of years. So I need to know that. So let's play that particular game out. If you're brand new, speak as often as you can. I don't know how you get good at this business of communicating with a group of people other than to communicate with a group of people. Now, at the beginning, you're doing it without concern over remuneration, because just like my mother said, if you're not providing any value, you're going to have to give the money back. Nito does not like it when I say that, giving the money back. That was a metaphor, not necessarily an actual instruction. But the more opportunities you have to speak, the more you get to work on how your material lands, things like timing, where your natural humor works, how you're resonating with an audience, because the audience will give you feedback immediately. So speak as often as possible in the beginning. If you're a little bit further on, then I would suggest start writing. If I have one regret in my business life, it's that I didn't start my writing career sooner than I did.
Okay.
Writing and speaking are parallel crafts, but they are not identical crafts. Being a good speaker does not make you a good writer. Being a good writer doesn't make you a good speaker.
Sure.
Perfect example, Judith Viorst, who's a wonderful, mostly a children's author, and I have followed her career. I got to hear her in person, and she writes poetry. A lot of her children's books are in rhyme, and she writes poems for adults. So her introducer had a poem that Judith Viorst had written, and so the introducer read this poem. It was incredible, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get to hear her speak. It's wonderful. She got up to speak. She was terrible because she was a writer. The introduction was better than she was. Now, it wasn't that she couldn't have been a great speaker. She just didn't invest in it.
Right.
So there's a point at which that I think you need to start developing a parallel craft. So I've gotten good at my platform skills. I'm, continuing to improve that, but I've got a great foundation. Now I need to explore the writing piece of it, because the writing piece of it is much more tangible and will last beyond words that you deliver on a platform.
Sure.
And oh my goodness, you cannot record a speech and have somebody transcribe it and say, now I've got a written piece, because they're not the same thing.
Right.
So midpoint, I would really focus on the writing stuff. A little bit further along, I would focus on the what's going on in the world of speaking and presenting, and in the world, in the life of my clients, especially if you have a targeted industry that's new and different. That I'm not as conversant in that part of what's happening in their world, and focus on getting yourself grounded in that new stuff, because as they face new challenges, you need to have new solutions to problems. So I'd really go into that customer world focus.
Chris, one of the things that I recall from the meeting at NSA North Texas was your commitment to learning.
Yes.
Is that DNA, or is that something that over some course of your life there was something that clicked that said, ooh?
We are so often the product of the environment that we were raised in. And as a child, and even as an adult, and you look back at your childhood, you start realizing that things that your parents did or didn't do probably was motivated by something that you had no idea of. We had a dining room table that had a glass top.
Okay.
And underneath the glass top was a map of the United States.
Huh, okay.
And my dad traveled, and the United States was his territory. And so many times we would sit down to eat, and Dad wasn't there. And so we would have discussions about the map, and where was Dad, and how had he gotten there from where we were, and then what did we know about the place that Dad was. And then when he came home, he would tell us what he saw, because he mostly drove around. And so curiosity and learning was inbred at the dining room table.
Sure.
As I got older, I asked my mother, I said, whatever prompted you to put that map there? She said, it was a terrible table. She said, I was embarrassed to have anybody see how bad the surface of that table was. So the only thing that I could think of to do was I found a piece of glass that fit it. And then she said, I thought, if I put a map down, it'll be covered up, and then I can just say we use it for education of the children. So,
oh my goodness. Wow.
And we were also a family of storytellers. And of course, the map then prompted the stories that if we had traveled to a place, remember that vacation, Dad would have a story when he came home. So the notion of being curious and learning, and for the younger people who watch our stuff, in pre-Google world, if we couldn't think of anything, we were sent to the encyclopedia. We had to go look up. So my desire, my need, if you will, to learn things has been a passion of my whole life. And when I started doing this work, I really got fascinated by how do adults learn. Most of us parent the way we were parented.
Okay.
My grandchildren will tell you that when I pick them up at school, the first thing I say to them when they get in the car is, what did you learn in school today?
Right.
And then they say nothing. Because that's what kids do. And then I'll say, excuse me, who do you think you're in the car with? Because that would not be an acceptable answer.
Not the right answer.
And so now they get in the car, and before they close the door, I know what I'm going to tell you about what I learned, because it's become this habit. So I thought we mostly parent the way we were parented, which is fortunate. If you had good parents, then there's a good probability you'll become a good parent. We do the same thing with teaching. We teach the way we were taught. And so I thought, I wonder if adults learn differently than children, because most of the model that I had of what learning was all about was through my school year.
Sure.
So I became a student of adult learning, and I have integrated that into all of the work that I do. Now, over the years, I've done a lot of training, but I'm primarily a keynote speaker. And the same things that I do as techniques in a training session to transfer the information into action, I do in my keynotes, because I know that's how adults will learn.
Chris, I want to ask you a challenging question.
Okay,
perhaps.
all right.
You're featured in Speaker Magazine.
Yes.
And I know some time back you were diagnosed with terminal cancer.
Yes.
And since we're talking about learning, from that diagnosis, what have you learned?
I have learned that being a professional speaker, which most people in the world translate into, oh, you're a motivational speaker. Right. And on some level, all of us are motivating people. And being surrounded by motivational people, my NSA community has rallied to me when the word of my diagnosis came out. Unbelievable. And what I heard all the time was people saying, you're so positive, and we're praying for you, and you're going to beat this. I know you're going to beat this. And at the very beginning, I wanted to hear that more than anybody in the whole wide world. But you know what? There are some diagnoses that you can't beat. I happen to have one of those. I live a life where there's a shoe out there and it's going to drop. And it's not if it's going to drop, it's when it's going to drop. And so that has created a whole different way for me to look at life and look at every day. And the hardest thing is to talk to my friends who just want to hear good news. Currently, I have good news. I am what's called NED in cancer speak, which is no evidence of disease. And so I'm on hiatus of chemo, and my hair is growing back, but when the shoe drops and I go back on chemo 12 days later, I'll be bald again. But I've come to love being bald, and which is tricky when you live in northern Wisconsin, because it gets kind of cold in the wintertime. So all my male friends who are shaving their head, I hope you have somebody who loves you who will knit you hats for the wintertime. But I was, how you're doing something and you're listening to the TV with sort of half an ear?
Sure.
And that happened to me, and I heard this sentence, and the good thing is there's the rewind button on the DVR, and what I heard was somebody saying, it's a condition to be managed, not a problem to be solved. So I rewound it, and this was a retired general, 4-star General Michael Hayden of the United States Air Force, who was being interviewed, and it was his quote, and I thought, that's the description of my life. Mm-hmm. We as speakers all want to identify problems, and we want to help people solve them, and that's lovely, and that is a commitment of our work. And God bless us that we're out there doing that kind of stuff, because that's the hope and the promise that people in our audiences need to hear. But every once in a while, you're going to get faced with something that is not a problem to be solved, but it is a condition to be managed. And so I have come to understand that I have a condition to be managed, and that means that every day I have to figure out what it is that I need to do in order to manage my condition today. And it is not going to be a problem that I solve. It will ultimately solve because my ticket will get punched. But the trick is that's going on for everybody. It's just you don't know it.
Right.
There could be a bus out there with your name on it. I'm at the point now where I can be fairly flip about this, because I've had a year and a half to manage my own personal expectations. We all need to do that. We all need to think about these things. We need to prepare ourselves, and we need to prepare our families. And I know that in the additional information, I've written a much longer article that has some suggestions of what you can do individually and as a family to prepare yourself for the issue that one day we're all going to face, which is the saying goodbye to somebody that we love very dearly.
Chris, for those people that are listening on VOE, mm-hmm. or perhaps watching on the YouTube channel, Thank you for your candor, and I would encourage you to go to Speaker Magazine so that you can read the short article that Chris wrote and the longer link to the article.
Perfect.
That goes even further. Chris, one more question, and probably people who are listening to this are like, Chuck, man, it's kind of ballsy, but what would you like people to think of you as? What would you like your legacy to be?
I have used many metaphors over the 30 years. You get lots of choices for metaphor, but the one that I keep coming back to, which is slightly ironic because in our family, my mother was a master gardener, and evidently the agricultural competence gene skips a generation because I just have empty pots that have dead plants in them. In fact, the local florist in our town, when people call and they want to send me a plant, the local florist refuses to do it. They just say, cut flowers, we'll take her, but plants she kills. So we will not be a party to this. So, but the issue is the metaphor that I use is that I am a seed planter. I am not a gardener, but I'm a seed planter. My job when I work with clients is to figure out what are the soil conditions, what are the weather conditions, what is it that this particular group needs, and I bring what I believe are the right seeds that can flourish in that environment, and I plant them. And I plant them very, very well. And that's my job, and I hope that that's my legacy, that people say, I heard you speak one time, and you said this. It was just what I needed to hear, and here's how I used it. I will rest quietly wherever I end up if that's what people say about me.